Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest season of Seconds Count, the ambulance service podcast that brings you behind the front line so as you can get a feel of what happens in and around what we deliver. Today, I'm joined by a previous guest on the show, Sean McCluskey. Sean, you're very welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be here. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. This week, Sean, is Men's Mental Health Week.
Yeah.
Why do we have a Men's Mental Health Week? Because you and I have been around the block quite a bit, and in our day, way back, we wouldn't have heard of any such thing.
No,
so why is there a thing like that?
I think, John, it's important now. I think that today, we've come so far in the service and people are beginning to accept that it's good practice to talk about your mental health. Your mental health and your physical health being so closely linked. And in relation to what we do, the job we do, and the job that our colleagues do on the front line, very difficult job, very challenging job. It can be very rewarding as well. But I think it has an impact on staff. And for years gone by in our early days, John, we just didn't talk about it. We would never way not to talk about it. It was taboo. It was no, don't ask me anything about how.
Why was that?
I think there was a fear. There was definitely a stigma about it. And I think that probably still exists in the culture even of today, not just within the ambulance service, but in general, that men have to be macho, they have to be kind of just, man up, kind of pull the big pants up and just get on with it. Don't show any sign of weakness. Don't show any emotion or any feeling. That's kind of, you're exposing yourself to being vulnerable and people will think that you're weak. And I think the opposite is true now, where people who are prepared to openly say, look, I'm struggling, I'm having difficulties, and all I could do with having a bit of a chat, putting their hand up quietly to say that they are vulnerable. I think the rewards from that are so positive that it should be happening more and more. And if I can, through this podcast, encourage particularly more men, indeed all staff within the service, but particularly men who perhaps would never have shared their thoughts and their emotions and how they reacted to different things throughout the service, would they be maybe in a healthier place? Because
but are you actually alluding to the fact that there are more men in our service coming forward and talking to us, and how do they present themselves?
Absolutely, John. And I think maybe in the role that I have at the moment, like in the peer support, staff welfare, health and wellbeing, under that umbrella of saying to people, look, if you want to talk to us in confidence, you can talk to any one of us. 7 days a week we're available, and we can talk about obviously the impact of the job, the difficulties of the job, the challenges of doing very difficult calls, but also about how does that impact on you on a personal level. Like your work-life balance very often is really crucial to staying healthy and being able to kind of take some downtime after the end of your shifts, recharge the batteries, reboot your resilience, and go back in for another run of shifts. And I think if there are things that are being impacted at home, it can be very, very difficult. And men, I think, particularly, just will not talk about it, some do, but I think the idea of the confidentiality is a big thing for me, because, I will never repeat back at anything what the conversation that I'll have with anybody within the service. But if men feel that they can come and talk to me in confidence about difficulties, about ongoing issues or ongoing struggles, whatever that may be, we're a listening service,
So how long has our peer support been going then?
Well, Emma Alice, as who we shared the last podcast with, it's coming up on nearly 10 years now. When
Seriously,
it
10
set up
years?
as a pilot, when they first started talking about it. But now there are 4 of us full time, along with under our lead, Anne-Marie McStalker, delivering that 7 days a week. And that's coming up on 3 years now, John, believe it or not.
And how do you reach out?
So, well, very often, I think we're established now to the point where people within the service are aware that there is an opportunity to discuss if you're having difficulties in relation to bad calls, difficult calls that can have an impact on you. I think we're well publicised through on our SharePoint in the organisation. I think a lot of our managers, in fact all of our managers now, station officers, supervisors, are very much aware that if they're concerned for staff in relation to an incident or after an incident, that they can reach out to us indirectly. We will then start making contact back to those staff.
Yeah, because, it is that reaching out bit, because going back to the short time I spent on the road in the late 90s and the early 2000s, we all attend bad incidents, bad road traffic incidents. And I can remember how that was dealt with. And I remembered on the first one, a young lad died at 23 years of age, and it hit me like.
Yeah.
But when I got back to the station, that was dealt with through black humour.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
the first thing I heard when I sat down and my crewmate went into the kitchen, and the next thing I heard coming through the hi-fi was that song, "You Don't Bring Me Flowers Anymore."
yeah,
You know, the
sure,
one that covers the road traffic collisions?
sure, sure.
And that's how that was always dealt with. And I do remember, again, in the late 90s, some of the serious bomb explosion sites,
Yeah,
Shankill
yeah,
and Oma,
yeah,
where it just couldn't be dealt through black humour. But
yeah,
even then, and I may be getting this wrong, but I remember at the time the Shankill one, the stories coming out was that the station officers and the area commanders brought the boys back up in the Ardoyne station,
yeah,
and they just cracked open some beers
yeah, yeah,
and just stood
yeah,
there and had that chat there with each other.
yeah.
We've moved on since then.
Oh, absolutely. And, I suppose that was like the basic needs that were met there after that. And I've spoken to people who, as you say, John, attended that incident, the horrible incident on the Shankill. And it was a case of there's some food, some fluid, sit, take a beat, have a bit of a chat amongst yourselves. But obviously not actually go into, kind of how you were feeling or what you were thinking at the time. But their reaction was, the manager's reaction was just, well, let's do something. Let's give something, food and fluid. And I suppose in relation to the dark humour, as you say now, John, there was very much there whenever I joined in the service, and it was helpful, without a shadow of a doubt. And it was in-house.
Yeah.
You never, people outside of it wouldn't have got that sense of humour. They wouldn't have appreciated what we were talking about. And indeed, had we been talking about it and somebody else had to come into the room, we would have shut up shop and stopped talking.
Those were all good efforts. I get the fact that they were really good efforts by your colleagues on your station to put their arm around you and say, that this is going to be okay. We've been there. We know what you feel.
Yeah.
And again, after the explosion in the Shankill and the Oma, it was the organisation reaching out and everybody trying to come together to try and get through it.
Yeah.
But when you left the station, and you alluded to it, you go home.
Yeah.
And who are you talking to at home?
Well, exactly. And, and what are you bringing home with you? Obviously, you're bringing home your memories and your very visual images that you've just witnessed having been at something, catastrophic. And obviously, you're not going to go home and share it with your family because then you're going to re-traumatize them and then they become worried about you. But if you're having difficulty sleeping, after a day shift, when you go home after things like that, who do you talk to? Do you come back into the station the next day? I think when we talk to staff now, a lot more staff are talking to each other and in the front of their vehicle, or outside of the ED department, they're kind of catching up and they are genuinely asking, how are things? When I heard you got a really bad call, I hope everything's okay. And that maybe is just by way of an introduction of just simply asking, are you okay?
Yeah.
And that, it's probably cleared over and over again.
But even at that, Sean, the colleagues putting their arms around you, the trust putting their arms around you, and now at the ED, people talking more openly about it, and the peer support they're all very, very valuable.
Yeah.
But surely there's some cases where that's just not enough. People need more help with their mental health.
Yeah, I think so, John. And obviously, then people will maybe have to come away from the front line and come off duty. And we have certainly supported people in that simply because they've openly admitted that, their struggles are so severe that they need professional help. And we are that link that we can kind of that we can connect.
So we do link to the professionals.
We link on to the professionals. We say this over and over again. I'm not a counsellor. I haven't been trained as a counsellor. John, neither has Emma, Ali, and our Valerie over in the West. We're a listening service. We're a peer-to-peer service. We can look somebody in the eye with credibility and say, look, we understand what you must be going through, what you must be thinking, what you must be feeling, because we've been at similar situations. We've walked in your shoes. But if we see and we identify, in conjunction with chatting to the person concerned, look, we think we could signpost you on to Lena, Inspire by Lena. I think it's important that we're prepared to admit that, yeah. And again, that's in confidence, John, and they have within 48 hours they'll be able to reach a counsellor and start the process of getting that professional support.
And what level of support do they get from Lena? Obviously,
they're a highly trained counsellors, John, and they come in, it depends, they come in at different levels, they're right up to, CBT therapies, rapid eye movement therapies. There's so much that Lena can offer. And they take over the care then. And the good thing about Lena for us, John, is that when staff or we contact them, the ambulance service have such a good contract with Lena that they're dealt with in a really quite speedy way. to reach out, to get the person stabilized, to get them the start on the journey of recovery. And recovering from, exposure to trauma and repetitive trauma can take time.
Yeah.
But the first step, and particularly for men, perhaps, and we're talking about men's health week now and mental health, the first step is to be putting your hand up and saying, look, I could do with a bit of a chat.
But is there in any shape or form, is there a generational divide in that? Putting your hand up?
I think so.
Why do men stay silent until they reach a crisis point? And are they less likely to, as a younger generation, less likely?
As I said at the start, John, culturally and in society going back years and years, it was just almost deemed to be that the man had to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't be seen to be weak. You couldn't be seen to be kind of emotional or kind of get physically upset. You had to kind of just bottle it all up and carry on, fight the good fight and, suck it up. And we still have that within the service today. We still have people who believe that, you knew what you were coming into. There's the job. If you can't do it, there's the door.
Yeah.
But sadly, that still exists. Not a lot, but more and more people now, I think, are acknowledging that your mental health is key. Is key to being able to do this job really well. And you have to get the balance between your physical health and your mental.
What is the connection there between mental health and physical health?
Well, I think, if you're doing, I spoke to somebody last week there who said they were absolutely exhausted because they couldn't sleep after night shifts and they'd had a bit of a run of calls and they couldn't get that balance of being able to switch off at the end of the shifts, go home, do something, kind of a little bit of exercise, a little bit of reading, do something with our family, go out, play a game of golf, climb a hill, go water swimming, whatever. And they couldn't do that. And as a result, then their mental health was still suffering. And what happened then was that they weren't getting enough sleep and they were coming back into work tired and agitated and restless again, and then starting to run the shifts all over again. And it was just like it accumulated to the point where they just couldn't physically then come back into work because it was just so difficult and they were so exhausted.
Yeah. Have you any evidence anecdotally, even Sean, that we're talking about you saying at the EDs while they're waiting for the ambulances to turn around, there's opportunities for them to talk and have those small conversations.
Yeah.
Have you any evidence that some of those conversations have led to staff referring themselves on to you?
Absolutely. And I think what's been happening, we've noticed in the last couple of months now that staff are contacting us because maybe that chat with someone at the back of the ED doors or in the back of a truck or indeed with a crewmate. Look, why don't you try and contact your support? Why don't you give them a call or drop them an email and see, and not do any harm? They might be able to kind of offer you initially the support that you need and then signpost you. And again, it's done in confidence, John.
Yeah.
And, we don't reach out to line managers to say, listen, we're actually kind of supporting a member of your team from your station. It's all in total confidence. And I think that gives people the security knowing that nobody else needs to know what's going on.
Yeah. And I think, speaking from my own personal thought process, that I think it's possible that you could be at a certain level and you will have that conversation with somebody and you might feel a bit of the load lifted and you might agree to that person. Thanks very much for your advice. I am going to contact them. But then the next morning you wake up and the sun comes through the window and you think, what was I thinking about last night? I'm okay. I'm okay.
Yeah.
And that just stores it up, does it not?
It does, surely, John. I think people now recognise that it's about your own resilience. When the well's empty, how do you refill that? How do you pick yourself up when the chips are down and you're having a bit of a tough time? Some people just throw themselves into their work. Some people maybe take an extra drink, go out for an extra pint and just kind of, cope with it that way. Don't maybe share their thoughts or their emotions or how they've reacted to something that they've seen or something that they've witnessed. So they don't talk about their feelings. Feelings are kind of, we're not going to go down that road,
Yeah.
But I think from my own personal point of view, it's so important that if you are struggling, that you do even turn to the person you're working with, or maybe you speak to that person at the back of the ED, or somebody, perhaps somebody who's maybe retired from the service, if you're still in contact with them or friends with them, struggling to get my head around this here. I'm not really sure where I'm at or, how do what's best practice here to get me back on an even keel. So I think it has definitely changed to the point where now people aren't afraid to initially talk amongst themselves. I think when we hear from staff now after incidents, very often I say, look, it wasn't good at the time, but we got back to station control, stood us down for a little bit with a cup of tea, with a bit of a chat. We talked through the call. We talked about kind of what happened at the call. And after a couple of days' time, things start to settle. And then maybe they don't have much time to think because they're back on duty 2 days later, back into the same vehicle, and off they go for another run of it then.
But then there could be a very small incident 2, 3, 4 weeks later, months later, that could trigger them.
Absolutely.
Which they didn't totally deal with at the time. I love the analogy of the well's empty.
Yeah.
And I think that you would probably agree that we need to accept the fact that there are going to be times where the well is empty.
Oh, absolutely.
The well is empty for everybody.
Absolutely.
You're never on your own. There's always somebody there that's got that experience. And you need to know how to refill that well, because it will drag you down different roads.
Yeah. There's a great analogy of the stress bucket. The stress bucket gets full and full and full and full, and then you go to your own personal well to draw on your own resilience to try and kind of go forward and restart and reconnect all over again. And it's just not there, And I think, and we've had people openly say to us, I had nothing. My tank was just empty. I had nothing left to give, and I was having to go back in and start that run of duties again. And it can be difficult, it can be very, very difficult.
And I know, Sean, this is Men's Mental Health Week, and we're trying to do stuff from a NIAS perspective.
Yeah.
I don't want to ask this question in the context of NIAS, but the well gets empty for lots of people.
Yeah.
And it gets so empty that people see there's no way out.
Yeah.
And I know you're interested in this field very much. So
absolutely.
What's your view about the suicide rate in Northern Ireland? Because the number of people, we all know them, where somebody has taken their life, or the relation of somebody's taken their life, and you thought, I thought that boy had everything.
Absolutely, John. And you've raised a very good point there. It is something that's very close to me personally. I've had personal experience of it in my own family. And I think we deliver training now. The training we deliver is called Assist. Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, and we're doing that now. The Trust are doing that now, providing well over 100, 120 people have already put through that training, and that's so that we all can learn that if we see somebody who's struggling, and if we think that somebody is really very low, and we can see that their well's empty, or indeed if they've even told us that we're not afraid to ask that question.
But that would need to be some really good and empathetic training, because I can imagine if somebody come up and certain people, you ask them, are you okay? You feeling suicidal?
Yeah.
You could maybe get a thing on the nose, like.
Well, I think, and again, John, that goes back to
what is the training like?
The stigma. Well, the training really is, it's about being available. It's about being able to ask someone, if you see that somebody sends out a signal, or what we call sends out invitations, that they possibly could be thinking about suicide, to ask that question. Don't be afraid to ask it. Why we don't ask it? It's a fear factor. Well, what if they say yes? What do I do? Do I they're signposting to somebody else? No, this training helps you then do a care intervention, to be a caregiver, and to promote and offer to the person that there might be an alternative here.
I don't know, Sean, like even that generational thing about manning up, etc.
Yeah.
I believe that possibly in years gone by it would have been seen as not a very manly thing to actually care enough about somebody to ask them.
Yeah.
But is it not much better to ask somebody than to say to yourself, I wished I had asked?
Well, John, I spent a long time on the road, as you know. I had 26 years on the road, and the number of suicide calls I went to was, obviously I couldn't begin to count them. But the sad thing for me was the majority of the ones that I responded to, particularly when I worked on the rapid response, the person was beyond help. It was too late. There was nothing to do except try and support the family as best you could. And those were the questions the family asked. Why did I see this coming? What else could I have done? The what ifs. But I wouldn't be a big one for statistics, John. But I looked not that long ago in 2024, which is only just 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. 290 people in Northern Ireland.
In Northern Ireland,
suicide.
You don't get to hear about
in a year, John.
You don't get to hear about
them. Hold on. 230 of those were men.
My goodness.
Over 80%.
My goodness.
And the majority of those were under 50 years of age. Now, when you break that down, suicide is actually the biggest killer in men under 50. And this is the thing that people don't kind of pick up on. They don't maybe think about it, and they don't like to talk about it. We'll hear things like, there's a strategy to try and reduce it, to get those numbers down. That's 280 people who perhaps didn't have anyone to turn to, or perhaps where opportunities missed, where nobody said, look, is everything okay? Can I be of any help, or do you need to have a chat about something? 280, John.
So it is far better to ask the question.
Ask the question.
And have somebody tell you to go chase yourself.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? And if they do that, John, that's fair enough. At least you've asked.
Yeah.
But certainly in relation to this training, and the training we've done and supplied or provided to the staff out on the road, they're saying that people will turn around and say, they'll be quite shocked. You're asking me about suicide. Well, yes, it is on my mind. I am thinking about suicide, and here's the reason why.
Yeah.
You know,
see, if you ask 5 people and 4 people said no, but one person said, "Yeah, I am that way."
Yeah.
That's the benefit of that. That's the return.
Absolutely, the return, and the return is, John, perhaps the potential there to save someone's life. You know,
it's not only saving a life; it's saving a family's grief. It's saving children growing up without without a parent. But as you say, 80% are men, you know.
Yeah.
So like that's you've opened up another podcast for yourself, Sean, to talk about suicide. But you know, and it's really, really important. But Men's Mental Health Week then is a positive thing. So what would you, in closing then, what are the key messages for men?
I think for me, the message is to try and get across to people. Look, the days of men in society having to be macho and strong and weak and not show any emotion, those days are over. Those days are gone. There are still people who believe in that. That's fine. But I think, you know, I certainly encourage my own son, who's 19, to be open and honest about what he's experienced and about, you know, his life experiences and how, if they're good, if they're bad, if they're difficult or challenging, you know, come and talk to someone about that. So that's the first thing, to get that shift, you know, the culture of kind of you have to be strong, and that there's no harm in being prepared to admit that you're struggling. And if you put your hand up quietly, privately to somebody to say, look, I'm really having a difficult time here, whether it's in the ambulance service, whether it's family and friends of your own, John, or other people that we know, or, you know, don't be afraid to speak and say, look, I could do with a bit of a chat here because I think I need some help because my mental health. You know, we're based here, John, in Knockbracken Healthcare Park, what we used to call the old Purdysburn Hospital, the Purdysburn site. And years years ago, when you talked about mental health, it was associated with perhaps institutions that you're going to end up having to go in. You know, we've moved away from that now. And I think, like, you know, any psychologist and psychiatrist will tell you, the balance of good health mentally and mental health and physical health is the key, perhaps, to trying to stay on top of things, and particularly in relation to this job.
And another return of this is that if you are brave enough to ask somebody, you know, or not fearful enough to ask somebody, are you having problems? Are you suicidal? And they do open up to you and they do seek help. It's all about paying it forward, because that person could be the most important person in somebody else's life who may one day be thinking about it. Sean, look, it's been great talking to you again. We could talk for hours and hours.
John, be here all day.
I'm you'll be back. You'll be back with us, you know. Thanks very much.
John. All right. Thanks very much.
Right. Okay, so there you go. That's a really eye-opening conversation with Sean McCluskey about Men's Mental Health Week. I hope you've enjoyed it, and that you tune in again next week. Thanks very much now, and goodbye.